like a value that I have is when everyone's looking right, I go left. And that is really great sometimes and really not so great other times. Like I don't want to say that, it's the best thing ever, but I naturally feel like when a lot of people are looking over there, what's going on over here and what might that mean I want to go and do. And
hello there, it's me, Steve Meller, and welcome in to Growth Ready, the podcast that allows high performers to reveal the reality behind what it means to ready yourself for growth, the personal and professional challenges along the growth journey, while also allowing the high-performance executive coach in me to satisfy his curiosity toward what drives optimal performance. My guest today is author Jason Silva, who's helping modern employees and their teams unlock a better way to work. His new book, Your Grass is Greener, is insisting that readers stop putting their attention on their overinvested future and focus a little bit more on the underinvested present in order to move toward growth one small step at a time. Hello there, folks. Welcome in to Growth Ready. I'm excited today to be welcoming into the show Jason Silva. Jason, before I give you the intro, you're certainly worthy of receiving. I'm just curious, when you ask yourself, whether it be as a person or as a process, what does it mean to you to be growth ready?
Yeah, you prepped me with that question right before and told me not to think about it too hard, which was great. You gave me exactly the right amount of time. And I think same answer applies to why I'm excited to chat today. I think just being open-minded. I'm sure we'll talk through some of my stories as we go through, but I find, you don't always know where the growth is going to come from. Sometimes it feels like the worst thing can be great for you. Other times you see something and you think, this is a terrible idea or not going to be the right kind of growth, and it winds up being incredible. So I think I feel ready for growth when I go into situations, open-minded, ready to kind of receive and see where it goes, as I am today, and excited for this chat to see what we wind up talking about.
I love it. Love it. We're definitely going to get into that, Jason. But again, let's get to this introduction now, because I want people to understand who they're hearing from today. Jason, folks, for those of you listening, is a multi-time founder of kids and a multi-time founder of companies. He gets his biggest thrill from helping modern employees and their teams unlock a better way to work. Jason spends time advising a startup portfolio valued in the billions of dollars, working with them on how to build great, lasting companies that people actually enjoy working for. He's a sought-after public speaker, instructor, and advisor on how to transform work into one of the biggest drivers of positivity in your life. Now, while spending all this time helping others establish how to do what they do better, Jason receives the same insight in his role as a father, thanks to his kids' comfort level in reminding him where he still has room to grow. My kids are exactly the same, brother. Finally, though, Jason's got his new book coming out this month titled Your Grass is Greener, which will offer an actionable guide for readers to improve the work they already do by using skills you already have. So it sounds as though, folks, that all the answers are inside of you already. You might just need a little bit of help having them brought out of you. So, brother, I'm excited to get into this with you. And everything that I alluded to there in the introduction, I'm just curious, what parts of that introduction, when you hear me speak it back, do you go, okay, when it comes to me, what part of this resonates with me the most? Like, what is the truest part of Jason in all of that introduction? I'm curious.
The truest part. Well, it's all true, I hope. And I'm grateful for it. I think what will kind of come out of it, it's funny, actually, maybe tying back to the thing we talked about earlier. Like, I find it's very easy to hear you talk about all the things that I've done. And I'm like, wow, that sounds like such a good plan that was put together to do like thing A, then B, then C, then D. But as you were talking, I find myself thinking like, didn't go like that at all. It was not like a premeditated, like I'm going to do these things in this order and build these pieces. And, going back to the point on open-minded, I think, trying to be as open-minded as possible for whatever opportunity comes along the way. And I think that is reflected in, there's a wide variety of things he talked about in there. Honestly, it's tough tough to be on the other side of listening to someone tell me some good stuff about myself. I'm still working on that one.
Yeah, you and I both. But that's actually a better way for me to frame the question in the first place: is what truth am I missing in there? And I think that's the question that you actually answered, which I appreciate, because I think that's the stuff that I think this podcast is now going to start doing for folks that need to hear it. Is that on the surface we can read that and be like, man, this guy's got it figured out. This guy's done it all. He understands life in a way that I didn't get the book that he got when it comes to life. But you're already sharing with us like, hey, none of that was linear. None of that was simple. All of it came with its ups and downs. So let's maybe go back to some of those younger years from a professional standpoint anyway, Jason, and just talk to us a little bit about when did you decide that the space that you find yourself operating in today from a professional standpoint, firstly, when did you first decide like, hey, this might be the space for me, or this seems like an area where I can potentially find success?
I would love to have a beautifully articulated answer for you. Like, I don't know that there was a single moment decision. You know, I got, I think, fortunate in that I had a lot of really great people behind me along the way. And I think I have a fortunate, I think it's like a lack of fear of failure. You know, I'm afraid. I don't want to fail. It's deeply uncomfortable. I've been through it many times. You know, one of the things you didn't mention is, you know, I've raised money and built a company and crashed it before, which is, you know, could be a conversation for today or a whole separate podcast. It's a heck of an experience to go through something like that. But there was always something in me where I was like, listen, I don't want to fail at this thing, but I'm willing to accept that it could happen. And very early on in my career, as I was kind of thinking back, as you were asking me the question, I think I'm lucky that I just prioritized for rapid, extensive failure. You know, I really looked for, here's the thing, I don't know if I can do it, let's try. What's the safest way possible? And try and fail and try and try and try. And some things went well, some things less well. And, you know, that's kind of the through line that I think I could pull through a lot of the stuff that I did was this idea of like, I don't know what's going to happen. What is the best way to experiment? How can I set up the right experiment to see if I like it or if I can be successful at it? And what I'm doing today is less of a concrete decision of, hey, here's the thing I can go and do, you know, because I think I'll be successful at it. And more, it's been an evolution over time. Like you mentioned, I wrote a book. I was like looking behind me to be like, oh, who's he talking about? Like, cool, there's an author that's going to be coming to this, right? And I'm like, I didn't set out to write a book. It's not a thing I thought was like in the cards for me. And I just, you know, it was obviously a lot of work. I know I did it. But it really kind of evolved over the years, and it's the same with the things that I've been doing. It's more of like a snowball, and where can that snowball keep rolling downhill and be most impactful, which I guess is a bit of a weird pun. But
yeah, but I something that's coming through immediately, though, is hearing you explain that it's not necessarily about knowing the destination, so to speak, of where you're trying to get to or that ideal career that you're trying to find. Again, speaking from your perspective in your journey, but it sounds as though it was more about you knowing yourself well enough for what you're willing to take on, that you're willing to commit to something based on what you know, and you're comfortable knowing what you know. You for whatever reason, you didn't feel the need to know more. You didn't feel the need to necessarily see an absolute guarantee on the back end to committing to something. It was more about, what do I know about myself? And knowing that, what do I therefore need to know to commit to what some of these first steps may have been? Am I kind of hearing that right?
Yeah, I think it's like a mixture of like, in my earlier days, I think it was maybe stubbornness is the right word. And now it's more, I don't love confidence because I think that word is not quite right. Like it makes it sound like I don't get scared of stuff and I feel like I'm always going to succeed. And I definitely don't have that. But what I used to have is just, you know, I'm very stubborn, you know, and it's like, I'm going to try to figure this thing out. And yep, some like 100 people are telling me it might fail. Great. Like, let's try and just like bang your head against the wall until you realize you either break through or you're like, there's too much, I can't do it. And I think now looking back, because I've done a bunch of that, you know, stubbornness, so to speak, and I've been through all sorts of ups and downs, I can look ahead rather now. And I feel as confident as I've ever felt. Not that I have all the answers, but that I have a playbook that, when applied to difficult situations is the best playbook I can put, to it. And you wind up finding your way out the other side. The idea of like catastrophic career crippling failure, sure, that can happen. I'm not going to be so cocky to say like, we're not going to record this podcast and I'm going to say something terrible and there goes my whole career. It's certainly possible. I hope that doesn't happen today, although it might get you some clicks and views. But because I've just been through many iterations and I've been fortunate to see all sorts of different scenarios, both successes and failures, I feel like, okay, things are going to come and I'll figure it out in the best way that I can. And then I'll figure it out from there in the best way that I can. And I've let go of this idea of what's the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, what are the exact steps that it's going to take to be here. Much more of, as you mentioned, like I'm directional. There's like a North Star kind of an idea, the things I like to do. And trusting that you put those things together, it's going to wind up in an outcome that I may not be able to project, but it will be favorable. Something I'll enjoy when I get there.
Yeah, I'm certainly hearing this comfort that you maybe have with the unknown. Am I right in hearing that?
Yeah, I mean, that comes from, startups. And once we dive into talk about the book, there's a lot of challenging things that now I know that I wish I had learned in a different way. But yeah, I think uncertainty for me is exciting. It's and I think in a lot of cases where we think we have certainty, we don't. And not to talk about the pandemic, people talk about it like crazy, but nobody predicted that. Right. You might have been sitting in a beautiful situation in your life and everything's set up perfectly, and a pandemic comes along, and it's a lot of things are just out of our control. And I think, slowly unlearning the arrogance I think I had previously of if I do this and this and this, I can control the outcome. And the outcome in a lot of ways is it's not under my control. What's under my control is how am I carrying myself day to day? Where do I spend my time? What does that look like?
Yeah. And I mean, you just have to rewind over the last, never mind up to the pandemic. Let's go back even further, 15, 20 years now. There's been this consistent rise in the discussion of anxiety and depression in the world. And let's just stick with the anxiety piece for now, in the sense that anxiety is all about that inability to handle what's ahead and to almost create these stories and form this perspective of what might be coming, and then almost get so caught up in, oh my gosh, the gravity of what might happen suddenly now is affecting everything you're doing in the moment. For you to say that uncertainty excites you, I think immediately has to put you in the minority. I mean, I don't have the data in front of me, but I think it does. It's based on my life experience. I think it does put you in the minority. So let's maybe look at that from a historical trajectory. Like, what might be some of those first moments in your life where you could see, oh, I'm actually running towards the uncertainty. Everyone's running away from it, but I'm like really comfortable running towards it.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's a good call it. Maybe I should be laying down a therapist bed or something. Like I think I've, nature and nurture, hard to tell. I've had a thing in me, I think since I was young, like a value that I have is when everyone's looking right, I go left. And that is really great sometimes and really not so great other times. Like I don't want to say that, it's the best thing ever, but I naturally feel like when a lot of people are looking over there, what's going on over here and what might that mean I want to go and do. And, early, like I'm an engineer by training. I did a master's in engineering. Let's go be technical. And I really love technical problem solving. I was in a job that was great, like by all conventional metrics. I liked the people I was working with. I liked the product I was working on. There was impact, I was paid well, whatever you want. I quit that job and I worked for free at a startup because I wanted to get into business and I didn't want to do an MBA. And I actually worked for free for a while because I was just like, hey, there's nothing on paper that says I can do this, but I think I can do this. Let's see what happens, and that was probably the first in my career, so to speak, like outside of school, where it was like, hey, this is pretty uncertain. Like the path was pretty certain that I was on, get better and better at the technical stuff and yada, 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 yada. Once I had that all in quotations figured out, it was like, why don't we just ball that up and whip it in the trash? And everyone around me, I think the mom test is a good one. My mom's calling me up like, Jay, what are you doing? Like, you just did all this school and you're going to just put it in the garbage. Like that doesn't, she didn't word it that way. My mother's incredibly supportive, but it's surprising, and yeah, of course, in those moments I have like, yeah, what am I doing? This is crazy. This is very uncertain, but it was something I wanted to try out, and it wound up being an incredible experience I would never trade.
Yeah, it's you and I have a lot more in common than you may realize. Outside of from a professional side of things, we're both operating in different lanes right now. But I have always, I've always zagged while most people zig. You said you look right instead of left.
Much better said than me, but yeah.
But the one thing I've always alluded to with that is just my sense of curiosity. I'm just so curious. I'm just like, hey, I think I see a shiny object, and everybody else is like, there's no shiny object over there, Steve. I'm like, I swear to you, there's a shiny object. Right? Just give me a second and let me go look. That's how I've lived my life. And to your point, it's served me, but there's been moments where it's led to brick walls and tons of bricks and all that kind of stuff. And you just go, oh, shoot, man, maybe they were right. There was no shiny object over there, or at least it wasn't worth going to check out. And for you now to be able to look back and say, I wouldn't replace any of that. What can you maybe provide to a listener right now that instead of them being in a reflective state, they might be in that position right now where there's this intuitive component within them that's saying, I kind of want to go check that out. I have this sense that there might be something at stake here that nobody else can see, and I really want to go realize the potential that I see in this situation. How are you going to help someone right now maybe just say, hey, I'm actually going to encourage you to go check it out or go pursue it? Like, how might you advise someone in that situation?
I think probably like not under emphasizing or under expecting the impact of like a very small step. I think that sometimes it gets personified in the media, or like you hear even me, I'm talking about it now and I can point to specific moments, but like I said, it only feels that way in retrospect when I can identify the moments. Like you don't know it going forward. And I think if there's a thing you want to go and do, what is the lowest cost, fastest way to figure out that you're wrong about it? So it sounds like we both run into some brick walls, and they taught me lots of lessons. But I better not run into a brick wall in the same way twice. It's painful, and I don't like learning a lesson in the most painful way. Is not the most fun way to learn it. But oftentimes we think, hey, there's a thing I want to go and try, right? Maybe you have an idea for a business you want to build, or there's something in your personal life that you really want to pursue. And it feels like you have to take some monumental step. I got to quit my job. I got to flip my life upside down. I got to move to a new country. What is that like bite-sized thing? If you can break it down to like, what's this business I want to build? Why am I trying to build it? What would need to be true for me to accomplish these things? And you keep kind of asking those questions until you whittle it down to like, I'm going to go and try to sell this one thing in this one way. It's not going to make me a lot of money. It's not going to take me a ton of time, but it is going to tell me whether or not there's potential for a shiny object here, whether or not there's potential for me to enjoy pursuing this further. And I think you can kind of stack these much smaller steps up into what feels like an overnight massive shift. Right. It's what it feels like on the other side, but people don't see the small iterations. And so just try not to overcomplicate it. Like, what is that thing? Try to break it down into its component bits and take a very small step to start. That can be really, really helpful, because that step leads to the next one, the next one, the next one, the next one. So don't feel pressured to like flip your life on its head, tomorrow morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Something you said there, and I'm not sure if you even caught yourself saying it, which I think is super interesting, is it's finding that lowest cost, fastest value, fastest return, however you want to put it, but to find out if you're wrong as much as find out if you're right.
Yeah.
And so talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I'm lucky. I consider myself lucky that I kind of came up in the startup environment. I founded a couple of my own. I was at Airbnb in the early days. It is like banged into your head, both by the great people that are around you and the nature of the environment. You've very limited resources, money, time, etc. You have to find the fastest possible way to prove and disprove what you're working on. And often figuring out that something is for sure true is really hard. It takes a lot of time. It's usually expensive. You don't know. but you can figure out whether it's false much faster. It's way easier to fail at something than it is to succeed at it. And just because of the way my brain is wired, and a lot of the research I've done shows that most of us have a negativity bias, where we tend to be able to see the things that can go wrong. Mm-hmm. Often that's described as fear or it's bad or whatever. I think the opposite. List out all the ways that it's going to go wrong and just run through those. Yep. Right? And if you get through those and it hasn't gone wrong yet, that's good data. I think it's so easy to convince ourselves that we're right, or at least I have an easy time convincing myself that I'm right. I get excited. There's a big shiny object. I don't care what Steve said. I'm going after the big shiny object. Yep. I find, I've done that and it can wind up in failure, which isn't the end of the world, but a failure I could have predicted is not a good use of my resources, time, money, whatever it might be. So I really try to flip it on its head and say, okay, what are some reasons why this thing wouldn't work out? How can I test that? Why could I be wrong? What are all of those reasons? How do I go and test those things? That's usually where the lowest hanging fruit tends to come from.
Absolutely love it, man. Again, I'm slowly learning that we're one another's spirit animal. So we got a lot more things in common than I appreciated. But the notion that we're trying to run through the wrongs. But the only way to do that is just to simply address them and see them face on. It goes back to this concept of prospect theory, and I don't know whether you've read about that, but I find it fascinating, and it's proven when I look back in my world of sport, coming from that is that for every Olympic gold medalist that's delighted, there's a really pissed off Olympic silver medalist. And then Olympic bronze medalist is just kind of like, you know what? I'm glad I got a medal. And it's that same sort of line of thinking is like, they're just happy that they were on the winning side because they could have easily been fourth and missed out completely. But the silver medalist is super, super pissed because they just missed out on gold. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of how our minds work when it comes to the good and the bad, or the things that could go wrong and the things that could go right, is that we would rather just fixate on the wrong stuff. And it's like, why don't we just go ahead and just acknowledge it then and just actually map it out and exhaust all those things that can possibly go wrong?
Even the gold medals. I mean, I've never been fortunate enough to win an Olympic medal of any kind. I was always a better athlete in my head than I was in the real world. But I would imagine, and having heard interviews with tons of, incredible athletes, even the person winning the gold is thinking, yes, but I could have done this and this and this and this and that. I'm going to celebrate this moment for 14.2 seconds. And then I'm going to think about how my entry into the water wasn't the best, or like I forgot to breathe on one of the strokes, or I'm sure you're going to know all the technical things in swimming that I don't know. They can shave off like a tenth or a hundredth of a second. It's easy to look at those things. And I think in a lot of ways, like, innovation requires us to try things that, maybe wouldn't work as quickly as we possibly can, to figure out, hey, turns out if I do it this way, even though nobody else does it like this, it's going to be, it's going to be better. Like we just got through the Olympics. I was kind of reminded of that when I was watching the guy, forget his name. He broke the high jump record. Yeah. And the history of the high jump's really cool. They didn't used to go over backwards until somebody was just like, let's just see, what happens here. It's like, wait a second. And that's like, well, what would need to be true for me to be wrong about this thing? I don't know. If I go over backwards and I can't clear what I can clear forward, and then next thing you know, we're raising it more and more and more and more and more. Now everybody's doing it that way. Right. Somebody has to have the willingness to say, could I be wrong about this thing? Well, it's the only way I find I'm going to go over this bar backwards. And let's hope I still land on the mat. So I think, really trying to flip it on a script and just say, how can I be wrong here? What could be wrong about this? That usually helps me find the lowest cost test. Yeah.
It's awesome stuff. And trivia question is Frosberry is the last name of the
Frosberry flop.
Move, the Frosberry flop. There it is. So that's just a really random trivia question that you can now answer, folks. But the something that has been consistent throughout this first 20 minutes or so is we've tied it all back to the professional side of your life. And I would love to just spend more time now on the personal side of just how you have had to deal with some of these very same things, these very same situations and or potential attributes that you've had to apply within the business world, and how it's served you and maybe how it's gotten you in trouble, etc. I'd love for you to now just speak to that in a personal through a personal lens and just start to maybe get into a little bit more, because I know there was this personal mission and catalyst behind the writing of the book. And so I think this is just a great time for you now to maybe share with us, Jason, like, hey, where is it in your life that you've noticed that these very same situations that you and that many of us deal with professionally are always prevalent on a personal level as well?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough story, but it's one that I wrote about in the book. It's why I wrote the book, and sad as it is to talk about, it's something I'm comfortable talking about. I think it's important to talk about, and that's it. I was building an AI company back before AI was like the coolest thing on the planet, and we had raised a bunch of money, and we were building out the team, and it was very much like an up and to the right kind of job. We're hiring people, it's going fast, it's stressful, etc. And then one day my parents went away on vacation, and I got a phone call from my sister, who was in the emergency room. Sorry. She had gone in for like a regular doctor's checkup, and the doctor said, "Hey, you got to go and get this checked out, not tomorrow, not in a week, like right now." And she called me from the emergency room. She was freaking out. I went down to see her. By the time I had got there, which was as fast as I could, but she had been through a whole battery of tests, and we didn't really know what was going on, but it was obviously really bad. When you're getting that much attention that quickly from every doctor around, they're obviously quite worried. And it became very clear that she had a very late stage, very aggressive form of cancer. I had to phone my parents and break the news to them on vacation and tell them to come home, which was like the worst phone call I've ever had to make in my life. And she passed away, unfortunately, about 9 months later, just prior to her 40th birthday. And so I lost my only sister, at a time when I had a young kid. I had a lot of people that depended on me at work, and I just could feel that I was the stubbornness I mentioned earlier of like, I'll just put my shoulder down and push through it. It doesn't matter what it is. Like, that playbook did not work. Like, I could feel that at work, in life, I was trending to a spot that nobody wants to be in. And that kind of kicked off, I guess, a total revision of my life, and it's kind of what brought me to writing the book and talking to you.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that, Jason. And again, I can't imagine it's something that no matter how many reps you get in speaking about it, it ever gets easier. And so I just appreciate you even being open to doing so here with us. And I have no doubt that is going to be yet another impact that comes from the book, is how your story, I'm sure, is something that has happened to so many folks around the world that are going to take so much, just so much encouragement from the fact that you've been able to deal with this and go through this and now write to this. And something I definitely think is important for us to cover here, though, that it's where I see the real potential and value now for these discussions and the way we're shifting with this podcast, is for you to be able to see that a moment in your life personally forced you to look at your approach professionally. And I'm curious that, for you to go through something of that magnitude, to see it, what does that say maybe about just how prevalent that way of what you were doing was at that time? It sounds,
It's a good point. I think nobody's ever pushed me in that particular way, which is great, because I get lots of questions on it. So it's a good push. The first thought I had was, I think it's prevalent, period. Not just back then in general. I think the way we work is broken, and like the statistics back it up. Like I could show you reams of data, but the broad sweeping picture is a lot of folks are not particularly happy in work. They're disengaged. They're frustrated with something at the office. They're not progressing in the way that they want to. They don't feel like they have this kind of mythical idea of work-life balance. There's always a better job out there. People are quitting and trying to jump to this and jump to that. And there's just a lot going on in the world of work. And it just feels like it's not working, and that for me was a realization that came only after I went through this cycle of, extreme grief, I guess is the best thing to call it. And I kind of had to unlearn a lot of stuff. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's what the book is about, is it, when I talk about, you don't you don't need some deep new skill. Like the fact of the matter from my experience is in a lot of cases, it's like unlearning. What are the bad habits or bad behaviors, so to speak, that we have going on that we don't even realize? And for me, one of those was this idea of, I've always been very clear that my family is most important for me. And if you had asked 8 years ago me, I would have told you my family is my number one priority. And what that would have meant then, and I said things like this then, was if I'm in a meeting, including this podcast, and I get a call from a doctor's office because my son's in the doctor, like it's easy for me to decide what to do in that hypothetical moment, right? I'm going to jump out of the meeting room. I'm going to take the call, make sure everything's okay. If I have to go deal with family, I'm going to do it. Okay, but I was also at the same time investing most of my resources in the future, not in my family in the moment. Like in a lot of ways, what I realized is I was overinvested in the future and very underinvested in the moment. And what that looked like was either working a lot of hours and or work is on my mind a lot and or work is impacting my mood in a lot of ways. I wasn't thinking a lot about I might be present for a family event, but how am I showing up for that family event? Now, what I think about a lot more is there's no change to my prioritization, but the way I'm living it is different. Now I think a lot more about how am I investing now? Like, what does my time look like now? How am I showing up? Same prioritization, different approach to it, and it has produced radically different results.
Yeah. And something I've noticed as well, and just in my research, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I swear through my research, I saw that you're quite intentional about who you're trying to work with right now in the sense of the modern day mindset. Am I right about that? Like I'm pretty sure I saw that just through some of the research of this. Hey, it's not about taking the, hey, back in my day kind of person and trying to make them figure out how to run their company. It's almost like part of your ability to do what you do is having people meet you at the table that are, let's go all the way back to that first word you shared with us, people that are open-minded, people that are willing to say, listen, something about this way of doing what I do and doing how we do, it's broken. There's something wrong here. And there's a need for us to find some solutions that can serve us all in the here and now, which I love that. And I think that's what is coming through this, which is so important for people to hear, is that it's one thing to address the issue with this long-term vision. It's another thing to see the actual doings of that happening in the right now. And I love that spin on this because, again, I think anybody here and listen to this, most people that listen to this show are ambitious and they find ways to present that way of, almost defining, hey, I'm doing it for my family the same way that you once were. Mm-hmm. But for you to actually challenge someone here and say, listen, if your decision is more about the long term than it is about whatever's happening with your family today, then in many ways, you're actually not prioritizing your family.
Yeah.
And it's a big shout, but hey, you happen to be speaking to someone right now that couldn't agree more with you too.
I guess the question is, are you? I think that there's a difference between having the aspiration and living it. And I think to be clear, it's not for me to tell people what right or wrong is in their lives. I think just making sure you're clear about it is what matters. You might say right now, there's this thing I want to get done and it's going to take a lot of work this year. And for the next year, I am going to overinvest it in work. I'm going to miss stuff with my friends. I'm going to miss stuff with my family. It's on purpose. And time will tell whether that works out the way you want it to or not, but at least it's on purpose. I think where we get into trouble is we look back and we say, geez, where'd the time go?
Yeah.
And like you can't go back and change it. So at least make sure that you do it the way you want to do it on purpose. Yeah. And I think that for me is, you want to pull 100-hour weeks, pull 100-hour weeks. Just be clear and intentional with yourself that I'm making this choice. This choice is purposeful. I've thought it through. Mm-hmm. We think deeply about like, I don't know, right now I'm thinking about whether I want to stick with my Sonos speakers and I'm like looking at all sorts of different research and why would I spend more time on a decision like that than I would with how I'm spending my time week to week, month to month? It's hard to keep track of this stuff. It just like flies out the window. Yeah. And so, I think it's largely challenging the myth that it's like, I want a different option. I'm highly ambitious and it always felt like I was fed this story that, well, you can kind of choose. Right? You can be very ambitious in work, but that's going to come at the expense of some stuff in your life. And if you want more stuff in your life, just cut back on work. And that's the way to accomplish that. And I just think that that is like untrue. I've never been more impactful with a unit of my time than I am right now. I built and run a business while writing a book, you know, and a bunch of other things going on in my personal life at the same time. It's totally possible. It takes a bit of a paradigm shift. And I was just like unwilling to accept this conventional thought that there's a scale, it's balanced, it's a zero-sum game. You know, the only way to get more out of work is to take it from life. Like that feels fundamentally wrong for me. Like I challenge it at its core. And a lot of the lessons I learned from that is what ultimately wound up in the book.
I love it. Love it. And I'm going to give you a chance to speak more in detail around how we can acquire the book and all that kind of thing, because this is going to come out right in line. You said it's coming out in September, right? So we're going to be releasing this in September, which is huge. And so happy to partner up with you on that too. And I think something that you've said here, though, is, and I want to make sure we're truly coming back to that word that you shared with us at the outset, this open-mindedness. Let's speak to people now, assuming, or at least encouraging them to just sit and listen to us with an open mind. I would love for you here just to maybe shed some insights around why it is or how it is folks can, in fact, start to better handle, and I already caught one of your terms, unit of time. So how can we maybe start to overcome some of these stories? And I love that you put it that way. Some of these stories, these fairy tale or narratives, not fairy tales. That's definitely the wrong way to go. Narratives of, hey, this is how it is. And this is the structure and you get to decide. Tell us why we can make this work on those terms that you're alluding to.
Yeah, I think so the kind of evolution from, you know, when my sister passed was things aren't working. So I got to try some new stuff. Again, very lucky that I had come up through startups because I had this test and learn methodology in my head and I knew what I was doing wasn't working. So I said, hey, let's just test a bunch of stuff, you know, and when that shifted over to work, it turned into like, what if I set more goals? What if I set less goals? What if I never set another goal again? What if I work 4-day weeks, 7-day weeks? What if I work evenings? What if I wake up in the middle of the night and work and go back to sleep? Like, you know, you name it. I tried every productivity hack, like every possible thing. And what I learned, which shocked me, you know, I kept this tracker and I'd be running 2 to 4 tests every 2 to 4 weeks. And I would keep track of like, what am I doing? How's it making me feel? How's my impact? I'd get feedback from others on it as well. And as I started kind of stacking up the learnings and I was looking back for trends, what I thought was going to happen was I would feel better as I was adding. New project, more prestige, more people reporting to me, a different job, a this or that or the other. It turns out that the things that had the biggest impact on how I was feeling and the impact I was having was usually from removing things. What are the impediments in the way? And what it started to feel like was a lot of people are out there, and I get it, thinking I have to change my job. And what that's saying is it's the environment that's the problem, not me.
Yeah.
But if you start with the assumption that like, there's some things I can do that's going to help me optimize the environment. They're completely in your control to change, right? You want to get a promotion and you hang all of your happiness at work and your performance at work and whether you get that promotion, that outcome is out of your control. You have a boss that has to approve it. The position needs to be available. It doesn't matter how much you bust your ass. If the job's not there and available for you, you're not going to get the job, right? Yep. And so rather looking at like, how are you working as you work your way towards that? And so what I found is there are a bunch of these tactics. You deploy them in the office, they have a big impact. I'll tell you about one just to kind of give you a flavor for the kind of thing that happens that I talk about a bunch in the book. Okay. So $1.2 trillion. It's a big, giant number, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. There are 16 countries on this planet whose GDPs produce more than $1.2 trillion, the whole country. Mm-hmm. In the United States of America alone, $1.2 trillion is wasted due to workplace miscommunications. Wow. That means that the US is wasting more, not in total, but just because people are having miscommunications, than the vast majority of countries are producing in an entire year. That sounds fun. It's a big, giant statistic, whoop-de-dee. Like, what do I do with that, right? Do the math. $1.2 trillion works out to a full day of lost productivity for every single employee in the United States of America. A full day.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you can find a way to get rid of miscommunications, you can save yourself a full day. You can literally accomplish what you would usually accomplish in 5 days in 4. And what you do with that other day, that's up to you. Maybe you want to work a 4-day week. That's all the rage. Maybe you want to, work on more stuff and accomplish even more than you were accomplishing before. That's awesome. As I started to poke on this, and again, it didn't come out in this way. I just kind of found the problem and then realized how big of a problem this thing was. What I found was I was thinking about communication all wrong. We tend to assume that communication is entirely about what comes out of my mouth or my keyboard. I read all these books about communication. I think about the words that I use and the messaging, and I used to think deeply about this stuff. I'm giving a presentation. I know you do talks as well. How do I want to structure this? Is this clear to me? Yada, 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 yada. We forget the most fundamental component of communication. And that's that two human beings are very different. And no matter how clear my words are to me, they can be misunderstood by you. And we're taught this in school. It's one of the funniest things I think we're taught in school. You've probably played, it's like Broken Telephone. You play Broken Telephone?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the way Broken Telephone goes. And this is one of these things where you see, you're obviously, you tell the kid a thing at the start of the line, and they whisper to the next kid and the next kid and blah, 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 all the way down to the end until the last kid says a thing that sounds nothing like what the first kid was told, and everybody laughs.
Yep.
Right? We've all experienced that.
Yep.
I'll bet you what nobody has experienced. The teacher then saying, and here's how to fix that problem because you're about to have to communicate with people for the rest of your lives.
Right.
So we have a huge laugh about how much we suck at communicating with each other, but at no point someone stops and says, here's a solve for this. Okay. And it's a big, massive problem. And when you look into how do you solve this problem, what you find is it's very solved. There are a bunch of industries where this problem is a solved problem. The challenge is most of us don't know about it, right? If you're a soldier, you've probably heard of something called a briefback. A briefback helps you solve miscommunications. If you work in an office, you might not have heard of a briefback. You probably haven't heard of a briefback. And on top of that, it's really hard to implement it well. Nobody explains how. And so I heard about a briefback, and I thought, great, this will be awesome. What a briefback is a briefback is effectively a repetition back of what the listener is taking away. It is the only way that I know of to make sure that great communication occurred, because I say something to Steve, and he can then repeat back to me my own message so I can make sure did he understand it? How did he understand it? Right? Humans are really good at did he understand? I say a thing to you, you don't understand it, your eyebrows bunch up, your head cocks to the side, you look at me weird. I'm probably not going to be like, all right, dude, we nailed it, on to the next thing. I'm like, oh, let me try again. The real problem is when it's invisible. That's when I say something to you, you understood every word that I said, but what happens is you interpret it differently than I meant. You go off, you do work for a week or a day or 3 weeks or a month, and only when we get back together and we see the finished product, we look at it and say, oh, shoot, some fundamental miscommunication happened last week. Now all that work goes in the garbage. And so when I found out about this, I said, great, I'm going to start doing it. And the real challenge with the briefback is not that it exists. It's hard to do it in an office well.
Right.
So we can talk about how to do it well, but you like to poke around, so I'll maybe pause there and let you do that.
I do. And what's interesting here is that I do that. I do exactly what you're talking about here. The briefback. I learned that I do that pretty well actually through this podcast, which is why I'm an executive coach now. This podcast brought me to my business because of the feedback that I would get, that I would hear what people say, kind of re-emphasize it and maybe even restructure it in a way so other people could hear it too. And rarely did anybody just go, oh no, you heard me completely wrong. But the fact of the matter is that it probably doesn't add that much time to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, because the one thing we would tend to do in that situation, most people at least, is that we will probably paraphrase. We will probably take what someone just shared with us over 2 minutes and repeat it back to them in about 10 to 15 seconds. And then it's on them to say, oh yeah, you got it. Or no, that's not what I was saying at all. And the practice of that, it's about being able to create enough of an incentive for people to say, hey, listen, this is worth it. And all of those statistics that you brought in on the front end is where the potential value for this will be seen in time. Is, hey, we're actually getting our time back. Here we are saying, hey, we need to incorporate this so we can repeat ourselves or repeat what we just heard. truth be told, that small exercise is actually going to save us not only a ton of time, but a ton of money on the back end as well.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. And again, it's just being able to stop for long enough and actually hear you make a point like Jason. It's huge.
It takes a little bit of faith up front, and you got to overcome a bunch of fear, honestly. And the faith part is the first time you avoid a miscommunication, a real miscommunication, you will be hooked, and it will happen. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
You ask for 10 briefbacks, at least one, if not multiple. For me, at first, it was, 5 or 6.
Yeah.
There would always be, maybe it wouldn't be monumental, but there was always something in a thing I was saying to someone that they were interpreting in a way that they say it to me. I'm like, I see how that makes total sense. I never could have expected someone to interpret it in that particular way. Mm-hmm. But the first time something like that happens, you'll say, I need to be doing this forever and ever and ever. Amen. Yeah. The second piece is it's a bit scary. And it's scary for roughly about the first 5 or 10 times. After that many times, it becomes a cultural norm. At that point, you can just like, hey, can you brief me back on that? People know what it is, and it goes totally fine. But the challenge is that there's a way to give a brief back that will land well. And there's about 357 ways to do it that won't really land well. The won't land well is, hey, Steve, can you tell me what I just told you? I want to make sure that you were listening to me.
Yeah.
No one wants to work with that guy.
No.
Right? You might solve the miscommunication problem, and you will create many other downstream problems. The key with a brief back is you want to keep it about yourself. Can you let me know what you're taking away from this conversation? I want to make sure that I did a good point getting my point across to you. It takes all the pressure off you, right? It's not about whether you can listen or you're smart enough to understand what's coming out of my mouth. It's like, did I get my point across to you? And then just like you said, it takes me 3 to 5 seconds to utter that sentence. It takes you 10 to 15 seconds to paraphrase it back. And worst case scenario, amazing. We're on the same page. Let's go. Right? It costs us 20 seconds-ish, 30 seconds max to make sure we were on the same page first. But in a lot of situations, we realized there was some distance between us. We close that gap and we save the pain that was coming our way before we go and do all of the wrong work in all of the wrong ways.
And I'm not going to let you give us any more value that's within the book outside of that, because I want people to buy the book. I don't want you to give all the secret sauce away, brother. I want people to actually go and pick it up. And so I love that you were able to actually provide us that, because not only have you spoken to your story of what it means to pursue growth, handle growth, the adversities that come with it, and then, of course, readying yourself for any and every part that comes with that. You've spoken to a lot of the issues that have also come for you through growth and the tough lessons that you've had to learn through it. And then obviously some of the personal insights as well allow us to see the need for us to make the space to do some of the work that you're now alluding to here on the back end, some of the practical side of saying, hey, life is too short for us to be wasting a day a week, and that's kind of what I'm hearing is like, wow. I mean, I've been made prevalent of that in the last 3 years since I started my business. It's like life is too short for us to allow ourselves just to let one full day of the week go by when we could get that day back and be using it differently or spreading it out more effectively in the areas that we really want to be. And I want to give you that space here as we close out, Jason, just to simply speak to why maybe some of that sentiment that I've shared here at the end is going to be captured in the book. But also, I'd just love for you just to speak to everybody as well about just continuing to keep on this journey that you're obviously on, but giving us those encouraging words in the process as well of how we can maybe keep going in this.
Yeah, I think a lot of it maybe answers both at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like if I had like a message to share, it's that like, you're good, and I don't mean that as like you're a finished product, but what I mean is I really feel like we're being told nonstop that like the answer to your problems is something that you don't have right now. Maybe it's like a thing you want to go and acquire. Maybe it's like some gigantic professional development stuff you need to go and do. We talked a lot about finding the lowest cost way. What my book is full of is a bunch of tactics that like, if you can talk or you can type, you can try literally every single one of them and you will see whether they work for you or not. And they don't require a massive investment in, I'm going to go and become an expert communicator. I'm going to read 50,000 books on the topic and spent a year going deep on it. I mean, all this professional development. I'm sitting here on the other end of my journey. I guess not the other end, but like where I'm in my journey, looking back at a spot that, I think other folks at least tell me that they're in is you don't have to rely on these big, massive step changes. They come from these small things. And, there's so much out there just pushing us to, you got to accomplish this big new job. You have to figure out a way to like develop this skill or you're never going to progress. I don't think that's true. And I just want to show people how it's a bit of a reframe. And I've gone through a bunch of the pain of finding the things to reframe. But it's a bit of a reframe and say, actually, like, there's a lot of low hanging fruit with the job you have right now, the work you already have to do, the boss you already have, the skills you're already, capable of. It's just peppering in a couple other tactics and you'll see a big, big shift. And that's the one where I just want people to see that, you might feel like you're in a spot where you don't have agency to accomplish some of these changes. I think you do. It just takes trying in a bit of a different way.
Well, let me try a brief back here as we close out.
Perfect.
You see what I did there? In the sense of, if you're able to simply have that open mind, as you alluded to at the outset, if you're able to have that open mind and step into the notion that if we can just put the things that don't work out on the table and be willing to actually try them all, then we have a chance to see that, in fact, we are good. We're fine. We're good in this journey that we're on right now. And I love how, again, the having met with you for this length of time, Jason, Your Grass is Greener is such a perfect title for the book. And just to be able to say, like, hey, just quit looking outside, man. Quit looking at that neighbor's yard. Quit looking at that other potential area of life where you could have what you need to have in order to be fulfilled, when it's all right there in front of you. It's all right there in front of you, and just have that courage to be open-minded, like I said, and be willing just to consider a whole bunch of wrong things to get to the thing that's going to prove to be the right thing. So
yeah, and the thing I tried to do for people is, hey, if you do want to pick up my book, I hope that I will save you having to try a heck of a lot of wrong things that I can tell you don't work.
Right.
And maybe I'll write another book one day that has all those things in it, but these are the ones that did. Yeah. And so you don't have to go through all the experimenting that I went through to figure out, what are the challenges here. But I that's what I hope to give to people, is a bit of a Swiss Army knife. Like, there's a lot of conventional wisdom out there that you got to go and read a book that's going to give you tactics, and all those tactics are about communication, and that's what you need to do. And I have a bit of a different perspective, which is like, no amount of being better at communication is going to help you with prioritization or decision making. What my book is more of a Swiss Army knife, where, yeah, you might be able to get a sharper knife than a Swiss Army knife, like some Japanese Ginsu blade or whatever. But if you're going into the woods and you can only take one tool, you definitely take a Swiss Army knife, because it's the most versatile. And so my book is not going to make you an expert communicator, but it's going to solve the single largest problem in human communication for you. And you don't have to become an expert at it. And we try to do that for 8 other of the most common problems. So rather than being an expert in any one of them, can you be just good enough at all of them so that the problems are no longer major problems and you do better and feel better at work? Like, that's the real big push that I was really trying to accomplish with the book. So would love people to check it out.
No doubt. Well, like I said, I'm really excited just about simply partnering with you in terms of just getting it out there and finding ways for people to access it. And with that being said, before I let you go, what is going to be the best way for folks to get a copy?
Yeah, it's up on Amazon, everywhere that you would find your books. It depends where people are listening from, but it's in all the major bookstores in North America. Amazon is probably the easiest. You have trouble finding it there, you can go to yourgrassisgreener.com. That's my website. You can read all about the book there. There are links there to go straight through to purchasing a copy of the book wherever you like doing that.
Beautiful. Jason, appreciate the time, man. We are better equipped and better just prepared now to go into the world and tackle growth and be ready for everything that comes with it, thanks to this conversation. So I appreciate your time, brother.
It's very, very mutual. Thanks for having me on, and big thanks to everybody I can't see who made it all the way to the end of the episode with us. Like, very, very grateful for everybody's time, and hope it was, valuable for you. And again, really appreciate you creating space for me, Steve.
Wow, just such a incredible conversation there with Jason. And I think as I leave you on this episode of Growth Ready, I want you to really ask yourself, when you think about open-mindedness, when you think about a willingness to step into what might be wrong, even to the point where you line up anything and everything that could possibly go wrong and just look at it and say, how willing am I to address these now or test these out, either to be true or maybe you've misled yourself and this thing that you thought might be wrong could in fact be one of the greatest reasons to do what it is you're considering doing. And listen, this doesn't need to be a drastic change in your life. This could simply be someone who's, hey, I'm on this career trajectory. I love the career I have. I love the place that I work. I just see an opportunity for more. Well, maybe this is an opportunity for you to reassess and look at some of that to continue on your growth journey. And in addition, if you don't feel ready to do this kind of work, just stop and ask some of those more deeper questions. What is it that's keeping you from being able to just simply consider options and some different alternatives to how you might do what you're doing? And once you're in that headspace, try to step into some curiosity too. Continue to be curious, continue to be open-minded, continue to consider what may go wrong, what may go right, and just keep having some of this dialogue with yourself. If you're willing to do that, as you learned from our conversation there, what Jason was alluding to is that you're trying to just define the fact that you are in fact worthy, you are good enough, you do have the kind of value that's worth putting out there into the world, and you don't need to be wasting all this time looking at how others are doing it and how you could be doing it better, etc. So just focus on some of these insights that Jason was able to provide through this conversation. It truly was a powerful discussion, and for me, going away from this, I know that I will certainly be looking for ways to create those lists. Hey, how many things could go wrong here, and how much time do I want to dedicate towards maybe proving whether or not that is so that I can actually find clarity with what that correct and necessary step may look like for me. I appreciate you listening. Growth Ready is here. It has arrived and it is very much here to stay. I am so excited about the new phase of this podcast and where we're going, the kind of guests that we have. But listen, part of this relaunch is going to be on you, the listener, taking the time to subscribe, to share episodes, to leave us a rating. All of these things really do matter in the grand scheme of things. So please be willing to do that. Be willing to find ways to invest in the value of us so that we can continue to invest in the value of you. Best of luck with anything and everything you've got going on in your world. And I look forward to doing this again with you very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to Growth Ready. If you liked what you heard and are feeling ready to grow, be sure to leave a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and share the episode with someone you know is ready to fuel their growth journey today. We love our community, so don't hesitate to reach out to us at podcast@growthready.com. And until next time, we are Growth Ready, and you will be too.